lot about during my PhD was how we can extrapolate research better. So extrapolation, here we have an example. So we have a bride here. She had 0 husbands yesterday. Today she has 1 husband. And then this guy explains that by the end of the month she's going to have about 30 probably. So that's the example of extrapolation. So why do we do that? And why is it he actually does? He takes a small amount of data and he tries to understand a general pattern in time or in space. And that's essentially the same thing as we do in science. And so why do we do that? Well, it's usually quite impractical to study thousands of lakes at the same time. So you take a sample from a lake and you study a batch culture or something like that. And then you hope that your batch culture will represent a larger environment. So essentially you think and you assume that your sample is a proxy for a larger system. And by studying your small sample, you can understand something about the larger system. And I would claim, if this is not true in any regard, if there is really no connection between your sample and the large environment, I would say your study is virtually useless. And so I think this is something that is important to think about when we do experiments. Sorry. So, how does this then matter for sterilization of the UM? So, in many of my studies, I need to sterilize the UM in order to make an experiment, in order to make independent manipulation of carbon and bacteria. And for me, one of the early questions was then, if I sterilize the DUM, it's going to change. But then the DUM which I had in my bottle is not the same DUM as I had in my lake. So how do I know that studying the DUM that I had in my bottle actually means something for the lake which I'm trying to understand? And to me, it was surprising. I thought I had a pretty simple question, because this was not intended to be a study. It was intended to be, I need to do this to do my experiment. And then I didn't find an answer despite asking a lot of people, so it turned out to be an experiment. I had a similar thought in a way for my biodiversity function relationship study number 4. So here I was a little bit surprised that many of these studies, when they look at how diversity and function interact, they go from a full community down to a single cell or just a few cells. And to me that was a peculiar thing to do, because if you want to have a proxy for nature, your manipulation should represent nature. And I thought that while having a single cell in an aquatic environment is a very unlikely scenario. So you have a really big assumption in your study there. And if that assumption is not true, what does the line between a single cell and a full community actually mean? You see a correlation between something that maybe never happens. So I thought that if we do this type of experiment, we should try to find some values close to the natural range. And we should test the interaction in that range, because that is the range that is actually going to happen. So that was a similar thing, to try to improve how our experiment can be a better proxy for nature. So, starting with the first study then. So, study 1, sterilization of TUC. So here we have 2 hypotheses. The composition and concentration of TUC will change due to sterilization, and the sterilization will impact the growth rates of the communities. And here we have the following design. So we had 4 lakes, and then we measured the carbon quality and the carbon quantity, and then we did sterilization, not this one, unfortunately, but we did the following 4. We did a 0.1 micrometer filter, a 0.2 micrometer filter filtration, a single autoclavation and a double autoclavation, when we added hydrochloric acid in between, because the pH increases after the first autoclavation, so we try to bring it back to the natural level before doing a second sterilization. And after that, we again measured carbon quality, carbon quantity, and bacterial abundance. And the results were as following. We had the relative change of carbon components. So here you can see the 5 different carbon components, C1 to C5. And here you have the percentage of change. So the percentage of change is the difference between the natural date and how the intense the signal was after sterilization. So if we look at the 0.2 micrometer filtration, we can see our values are close to 0. meaning that there's only a few percent difference between the sterilized DUM and the DUM that comes from the lake. Looking at the 0.1 micrometer filter, we can see it's larger, but comparing to the autoclavation treatments, it's still minor. So the autoclavation treatment caused a great increase in signal strength, meaning that the DUM will simply be quite different autoclavation compared to the one you sampled in the lake. And then looking at bacterial cell abundance, we can see, so we have the 4 different treatments here, and then the colors of the different lakes. So we can see that the autoclavation treatment caused a great increase in bacterial growth, while the 0.1 micrometer filtration seemed to reduce the growth rates. And for the quantity of DUC, so here we have DUC, and here same division of treatments. The impact of treatment was less compared to the natural variation of the lakes. So here, yeah, there was an impact of the treatment, but not so big compared to the variation that only was there from the beginning. So the conclusions from this: the 0.2 micrometer filters best preserve the DUC composition. Autoclaving greatly altered the composition of the DUC, and autoclaving increased growth rate, while the 0.1 micrometer filtration caused a reduction in the growth rate. Study 2. Will substrate delivery rate affect the bacterial community? So here again we see an example of how a lake can be quite variable in both the type of carbon available at a certain time period of the year, but also the amount of carbon available at different time frames. So an example of how substrate can vary over time. So to test this, we had 2 chemostats, and we had 2 medias. So one media with acetate and another media without acetate. So for the media with acetate, we had a continuous low concentration that was fed over 48 hours. And in the other one, we added the same total amount of sodium acetate, but every 48 hours. So one had a pulse, and the other one had a low continuous flow. But the total amount of energy is same in the 2 reactors. And then we measured the following thing. We measured the APLC and the 14C radio-labeled acetate in order to see the uptake rate of the acetate. And then we measured again bacterial growth rate, and we also looked at the bacterial composition of the communities. And then the results. So here we have the amount, this is bacterial cell abundance, so here we have the amount of cells, and here we have measurement days, so it goes for about a month. So what we can see in this graph is that the pulse here is consistently higher cell abundance compared to the continuous treatment. Looking at over the entire month, the pulse treatment had about 2.1 times higher cell abundance compared to the continuous treatment. And when we looked at cell size, we also saw that the cell size were comparable, or there was no significant difference, telling us that it's not only that the cell abundance increases, but also the biomass of the reactor. Looking at substrate concentration, so here we have amount of acetate, and here we have time. So we added a pulse here of acetate, and we can see in the pulse treatment after 6 hours, the acetate is no longer detectable, while in the continuous treatment we see that after 12 hours we can still detect the acetate pulse, meaning that the pulse reactor was more efficient in its uptake of acetate. Make sense? Oh. You can ask if there is something there. And then looking at the bacterial community, we can see that there was a separation between the 2 communities, between continuous and pulse treatment. So, to conclude this, there was a higher cell abundance in pulse treatment, a faster decrease in substrate concentration in pulse, and there was a shift in the bacterial community between the 2 treatments as well. So, study 3. Does adaptation affect DUM utilization? So the first hypothesis here was if bacterial communities would be better at utilizing foreign compared to indigenous carbon. And what we mean with that is that we assume that the bacteria would be better at utilizing carbon that comes from the same origin as in the cell relative to a foreign carbon source. It might be that the foreign carbon source is better than the indigenous one, but relative to the indigenous community would be always better performing compared to a foreign community in any given energy source. And then we thought that the communities, as we allow them to adapt over time, will become equivalent in the utilization. And as this happened, we thought that the communities will also converge. They will gradually become more and more similar in the species pool as they become adapted toward the same carbon source. And for this experiment, we had the following design. So we had 2 lakes, and we had 4 treatments. So we took the media and the inocula for the community from the one lake and same from the others. So here if we look at CY, for instance, we have clear indigenous, meaning that the media comes from the clear water lake and also the community. And if we look at clear foreign, then the media comes from the clear lake, but the community comes from the humic lake. And then we let them evolve over 42 days, and every week we took up measurements to test how efficient they were in the utilization of carbon, how much they consumed, how well they grew, and how it affected their composition. And then the results. So this is the same, this is an NDS plot. This is the same data but colored with different treatments, and by different treatments. So if you look down here first, we can see this is time point 1, and this is time point 2 to 6. So what this tells us is there was a big shift between the first week in the community composition. But following the first week, there was no longer a clear direction of change. So it seems like there was a rapid adaptation at first from the communities, but then they seem to have settled somehow. And then if you look at this graph up here, we can see that the 2 shapes indicate the 2 media. So here we have the clear media and here we have the humic media. So the media caused a strong selection pressure as the communities shifted rather greatly from their original composition. And we can see that they are clearly divided. And also if we look at the 2 colors, we can see that the different communities also remain separate within the 2 media. And what this tells us, or what tells me, is that there seemed to be a strong selection pressure of media, but it didn't select the same species in the 2 communities. So the 2 communities both contain species that could function optimally within this carbon, but they were not the same species in the 2 communities. Looking at carbon composition, we have a little bit different story. So here we can see that there is a clear separation between the 2 media. And if we look at the 2 communities, which is the full and the one circle, they are actually difficult to see. And the reason why they are difficult to see is because they're overlapping. And what that tells us is that the communities has almost no impact on the carbon composition relative to the natural variation. So if we combine these 2 graphs, it also can tell us something, that the carbon seems to have a big impact on the bacterial community, but the variation in the bacterial community does not seem to have a big impact on the carbon. Looking at functional measurements,